Okay, it's time for a little talk about life in Saigon.
Well, hello from Ho Chi Minh City at one of our favorite cafes here in our local neighborhood, Vinh Tan.
We thought we'd come out today and give you a little bit of information about the pros and the cons of living here in Saigon. A lot of people have said recently that they've used our videos as they moved here, which is great. So I think some practical information about the good side and also the not so good side about living in this city could be really helpful if you're considering coming here. We love living here, but there are definitely some things you need to think about. It's not for everybody. That said, we're going to start with some of the pros of life here in Saigon, and I'd say the number one thing for me is the people. What do you think?
I think the cost of living is the most important thing for me.
Okay, well, we'll start with people, and I will say that they're very friendly here in Saigon. They're quite a warm people, and I work with young people and they're very optimistic about their future, which is actually awesome, and it's quite a change from like last place I was working before Turkey was in New Zealand, and I found that they weren't so bright about their future, and same in Turkey. They didn't have like all that optimism about their future, so it's great. They also try to help you as much as they can, even if they don't speak a lot of English. And you can always find some people who speak some English, especially if you look for younger people here in the city.
And for me, the cost of living is quite important. I'm not earning a regular wage anymore, or at least not a decent sized one. So where I can save money is important. Things are rather cheap here in Vietnam overall, especially food. Rent, you get quite a lot for your money here if you're willing to spend over $1,000 US a month for an apartment. You can get a great apartment. Food is cheap. You can eat really cheaply if you want to eat Vietnamese style. If it's just local produced meat and veggies that you're after. If you want to get some imported dry goods or imported meat from Australia, then it does get more expensive. But overall, it's pretty cheap here.
And another thing about the affordability that I'd like to talk about is there is a range of affordability depending on how much you're making. So if you don't have much money, you can live here really cheaply. You can live outside of the city center and the surrounding areas, and you can get a place really cheap. But if you want, like if you're making a good salary and you want a good apartment, you can also find really good apartments here. You can find anything you want. You can pay a little bit more for some of the gourmet food places. So not only is it affordable if you need it to be, I like the fact that there is a range of affordability. So, you know, anyone can come and live here for whatever budget they want to come for.
You can get Worcestershire sauce even, so you can get those comfort cooking products for your home if you want them, which is important to me because I'm an ex-chef.
She's the one that cooks.
Yeah.
All right, our drinks have arrived, so let's get those.
One thing in Vietnam is they make the best cold drinks. Here we've got chocolate and coconut with coconut bits on top. Have a look at that, guys. That is awesome. Look at that. Incredible.
Now this is like our favorite drink here and our favorite cafe to have it. So good. So refreshing. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about is safety here. So as you can see, we're women, kind of, you know, middle-aged women, and I would say, you're not middle-aged? I'd say that it is very safe for women here. You get little to no harassment on the streets. You know, people are quite respectful. You don't have to worry about traveling alone, anything like that. I always feel very safe no matter what the hour. The one thing to be a little bit aware of is that in the tourist centers, you do want to watch your wallet, your phone, those types of things. There's a little bit of petty theft, same as you have in any city in the world. But overall, I don't fear for my life. Certainly I don't fear like public shootings and things like that like in the US. I feel very safe.
All right, guys, and the next pro about living here in Ho Chi Minh City in particular, and in Vietnam generally, is the strategic location. It is incredible if you want to travel. Most destinations in the Asia sphere are only about 2 to 3 hours flight away maximum. For example, Singapore, KL, Hong Kong, are all within the 2 to 3 hour flight distance. But what's even better is if you want to go to another region, say the Middle East, flights to Dubai are only 7 hours. We come from New Zealand and we're used to a flight to Dubai being 16 hours. Can you imagine? So yeah, this is a big step up in comfort and in the ability to move around the world at a more cheap rate.
Exactly. So you might not think of Vietnam as having the cheapest air tickets, but it's a lot cheaper than New Zealand, I can tell you that. So compared to what we're used to, it's great for its strategic location. And also there's lots of flights from Saigon to domestic flights within the country. And that's great as well. You can go anywhere in the country on a short flight.
Yeah, and there are several budget carriers that operate within Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand. So getting across these countries in the region, Indonesia, is a cinch.
Yeah, and Susan even took a budget flight to Australia, and that made it really quite cheap to get back and see family in Australia as well. So there are quite a few good options, even if you want to go a bit further afield. The next plus, for me at least, is the food. I love Vietnamese food. Whenever I came here the first time, I didn't know much about it. I knew pho and I knew banh mi, and that was pretty much it. So I've expanded my repertoire, and I find it's all delicious. And what I like about it too is it doesn't come already spicy for the most part. There's a lot of things on the side, and you put it into taste. And so you just put in the herbs, you put in the sauces, you put in the chili to suit you. And I think it makes it quite nice for foreigners who might not have the same level of tolerance for spices as the locals, and might not be used to some of the flavors either, like the fish sauces and stuff. So you put it in yourself. Even my mom, who hasn't traveled much, she loved Vietnamese food whenever she came here. So that's a testament that it can be really good for people who, like things a little bit on the bland side. But you can make it spicy if you want by adding things on your own. The other thing is the food hygiene, which some people might say, oh, it's not so good here. But I have to admit, I've never had a bad stomach eating out here in Saigon. And I've eaten out a lot. I always go to places that have lots of people, that I know cook it fresh. And once again, people might say, well, you've traveled a lot, you must have a stomach of steel. Sometimes I do, but also my mom did not have any stomach issues, and she's famous for having issues every time she travels to Southeast Asia. So I think that if you follow the rules of going to busy places that look relatively clean, have a high turnover, it's great.
Rightio, next one, Steph. What's the last pro on our list?
I would say it's the interesting culture. And it's very diverse. Here in Saigon, I'd say that it's got a very youthful culture, a lot of eating out culture, a lot of street culture, so lots of things you can see. It's also a nice mix of like Buddhism, ancestor worship, there's some Catholicism as well, so there are kind of all these different beliefs, there are all these different traditions, they're big on celebrating their holidays, and they have lots of events here in the city for things like Lunar New Year, the Mid-Autumn Festival, all of those types of things. So it's a great place to kind of get the culture, and a lot of cafes, a lot of cafe culture. You go, you sit at a nice little place, have a cheap coffee or drink, and you just enjoy the street scene.
And I'd like to add communism. It's one of the last remaining communist countries. So there's only China, Russia, Laos, and Vietnam that I can name.
Cuba?
I don't think, is Cuba still communist? Yeah, probably. So yeah, 5 maybe.
North Korea.
Oh yeah, sorry, North Korea.
Can't forget
6.
about you.
6.
Yep.
All right, so that summed up our pros.
Yep.
Let's quickly talk about some of the cons.
Yeah, so let's move on to the not so shiny side. Sometimes when you're watching vloggers, they give you a picture that everything is sunshine and rainbows. There are some things you really need to consider if you're coming to Saigon.
Yeah, not as a tourist, to live.
Yeah, to live, exactly.
To live.
So the first thing I'd say is there is a lot of bureaucracy. So if you want to come here and work, you better make sure you have your paperwork in order, and it's best if you do that in your home country or the country that your degrees are from. I mean, I am well qualified for my job. I had enough experience, like twice as much experience as I needed, but because I was in a third country and I couldn't get everything legalized, I almost didn't get to come. And I ended up, luckily they have a mobility advisor at my job who basically, I sent my degrees and everything to Vietnam, which was horrifyingly scary for me, and she did all the work, all the running around, managed to get the New Zealand embassy here to legalize my documents, all kinds of things that I would never have been able to do from Turkey, which is also very bureaucratic, as I found out as I tried to do it. And another bit of bureaucracy is with the banking. So it's quite hard to open a bank account. They want everything red rubber stamped, and yeah, if they don't have your new TRC straight away, your temporary residence permit, they will shut down your bank account. So there's a lot of things that you need to, rubber stamp, cross your T's and dot your I's here.
Okay, so one of the things you'll notice when you move into the suburbs or into an apartment block, or even when you're just walking around the streets here in Vietnam, is the noise, the cacophony. There's beeping, there's motorbikes going everywhere, there's people yelling, there's neighbors playing loud music, there's karaoke at 2 a.m. blasting your apartment.
On a Monday night or a Tuesday night.
Yeah, there's no sense or reason, rhythm to it or anything. It can happen anytime, and it's pretty obnoxious. It takes a lot of getting used to the noise here, especially if you're from a smaller town or a quiet place like New Zealand, Australia, Canada. Really, it takes a lot of getting used to. So that's one of the cons.
Yep.
All right, next con.
This could be a con only for some people, but the weather is something you need to consider. If you love hot weather, you're going to love Saigon. But if you don't, it could be a struggle. There are two seasons here, hot and dry and hot and wet. And both of them, the main word is hot.
Yeah, and don't believe her if you like hot weather. I like hot weather. It's not hot weather here, it's boiling weather here.
Yeah.
It's humid as all F. It's out of control humid. Make sure you can afford that AC bill.
Yeah. And if you absolutely hate hot weather, then I really can't recommend Saigon for you. I think you're going to suffer in the heat.
Yeah, go north.
Yeah, go north. And even then, I would say people complain that Hanoi's weather, though not as hot, is equally not as comfortable. Maybe Da Nang. I think Da Nang might have better weather.
Yeah. So what's next, Steph?
The next thing that I think you really need to think about is, can you handle a chaotic city? Because it is next level chaotic here. It is a combination of what we've talked about with the noise, the traffic, lots of people, lots of things going on all the time. And if you want a peaceful life, then this might not be the city for you. You have to really consider yourself and your personality. Sometimes I really enjoy the chaos because I think it's interesting. I've got quite a long commute and there's always, somebody going by with a refrigerator on their bike, or 10 people on a motorcycle, I swear sometimes, maybe 4 or 5. But anyway, lots of people on a motorbike, I find it quite interesting. But then there are some days that it just feels a bit too much. All the noise, all the people. You also don't have a lot of space sometimes. I know that a lot of expats here, they complain that every time they sit down somewhere alone, somebody joins them pretty quickly. So, there's that feeling that you don't have a lot of personal space. I think especially New Zealanders have complained about this quite a bit to me.
Alright guys, one of my pet peeves living in less developed countries in particular is the treatment of animals. And this really affects me. I get really down, I get really upset, and I do want to save every animal. Unfortunately, I don't have the money, the property, or the time, etc. to put into saving all these animals. So sometimes I don't like to go out simply because I don't want to see the treatment of a particular cat or a dog on the streets. In countries like Egypt and Jordan, I had a similar problem with the way they treat horses, cats and dogs there as well. It's not just here in Vietnam, it's right across the board in every less developed country in the world. But yeah, if you're a bit of a softie or an empathetic person like I am, I find it quite difficult to come to terms with why no one helps these animals. Why do I feel like it has to be me every time? And unfortunately, because I'm not a citizen here and I don't own a villa here, I can't do a lot. I just have a small apartment. I'd love to have more area to let them come into the grounds of a villa to feed all of them and to take care of them, but it's just not possible, and at times I find it quite heartbreaking.
And I hope you haven't been hearing the noise that's beside us too much, but there's somebody playing music, there's a dog barking, so that's kind of what we talked about. You know, there's always quite noisy. That said, we're moving on to our final kind of con or thing that you need to think about. It's not something I notice particularly, but a lot of people do complain about it, and it is a problem, especially in the waterways, and that's the trash. So, you know, there's a lot of trash left behind, and if you take a nice boat trip down the river here in Saigon,
Or even to Halong Bay.
even to Halong Bay, if you're not in Saigon, if you're just traveling, there is a lot of trash in the river, there's a lot of trash along the street, and I remember a time in the US too where we had quite a bit of trash around, and I think it's just time, but it is something you need to be aware of. Hopefully with the younger generation, I know they're learning a lot about sustainability and things like that. I hope that it does improve, but if that type of thing bothers you, you do need to think about that.
Yeah, but that means you need to stay in your Western country because every country in the developing world has a major plastic on the street and in the waterway problem.
Yeah, and I'd say that's probably why I don't notice it as much, but a lot of newbies that just come from the West and haven't traveled too much in developing countries, then that's what they complain about.
All right, guys, we hope this little talk has given you some food for thought if you're planning on moving here to Vietnam, and more specifically to Ho Chi Minh City. Life here is pretty good, I have to say. You know, I'm certainly not rushing back to Australia or New Zealand. So for all its negative points, the positive far outweigh them.
And that's what I want to stress. We didn't do this to like have a dig at Vietnam or at Saigon. We actually love it here, but I do know people who have moved here and really it didn't suit them. So if you're thinking about it, I think it's really good that you at least start to think about both sides of the coin and decide, is this really the place for you?
Yeah, that's right. The number one thing for me in the pros, cost of living, and the number one con for me is the treatment of animals. How about you, Steph?
I think that the number one thing, well, there's two that are the number one things for me, and that is the people, because I deal with them a lot in my work and I love dealing with them. So people are great, and also the safety, because I love being somewhere that I feel like I can go out anytime. I don't have to worry about my safety much, all of that type. I guess my biggest con would be probably the noise. Sometimes I find it a bit tiring to constantly be surrounded by noise, but we do have a really nice place that we live that's quite quiet, so I feel like I can get away from it a little bit. But for me, that was one thing that I felt like I needed whenever we picked a place, was a quieter neighborhood. And so yeah, just think about these things, decide if Saigon is the place for you and your family. I can highly recommend it. I think Susan can too.
Yeah.
But I do think that you have to have a certain personality or it might just not gel with you.
Yeah, I like the, you know, it's got adrenaline in its veins.
It's
you know,
vibrant.
It's noisy, it's active, it's loud, it's crazy, it's chaotic. But all of that is stimulating, you know. Very hard to go back to living in Twizel on the South Island after living here.
It's true.
So you're never bored.
No.
A bit like India, never bored. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one. Where?
Girls on the Loose.
Bye-bye for
Catch
now.
you next time.
Bye.
Hang on a minute, don't go yet. Hang on for the next video. We're going to be in a whole new destination.